There are exciting plans afoot to develop one of Milton Keynes' first office buildings into MK Gateway, a dynamic location for work, living and community. These plans to transform Saxon Court bring back memories for those who've had a connection with the building over the last 40 years.
First year of my time at MKDC was working on Saxon Court. And I started working on Saxon Court in January 1978. And I worked with Ivan Pickles, who was a sort of senior architect, very experienced putting buildings together of the scale of Saxon Court. We had trouble in bringing the job in on the cost plan that had been improved, particularly the roof over the atrium. The original roof, which was very similar to the roof over Middleton Hall, with the exposed steel girders, we could not get a cheap enough solution for that. And that is one of the disappointments of the building as a result. It's got this very slightly clumsy roof on the top. It was originally designed for small units, but of course MKDC took it over as a headquarters building.
Saxon Court became the new HQ, and we moved up from Wavendon Tower. And prior to the move, all of the directors gave input as to where they wanted to be in Saxon Court, and I'd placed myself with the whole of my commercial directorate so that I was close to them. Having moved in there, within a week, Frank Henshaw, the general manager, was determined that no, I shouldn't be down there with the boys and the girls. I had to come upstairs being close to him. Now, I'm not sure what drove that thought, but anyway, I moved up to a much more palatial office on the top floor, almost within a month of being there.
86 or 87, I moved over into commerce, and I had initially a seat on the outside in an open plan area. Then I was somebody left, so I got a little promotion in terms of desk space rather than anything else. So I was then got an office overlooking the atrium. The thing was, you could be there and you understood the sort of passage of light, but not the weather. And so if you didn't go out at lunchtime, you wouldn't necessarily know what the weather was like outside. The corporation had a social club called the Tower Club that was based at Wavendon Tower. It almost seems incredible that you kind of knocked off for lunch and went to the bar. And there were various ideas as to where the social club could be relocated to, and it went up to Kiln Farm and became the Kiln Farm Club. But it still had the bar at Saxon Court, and run by Terry Tiderman. And he could do outside bookings.
1989, I arrive in Milton Keynes and I'm employed by Interaction Community Arts. And at the time, I was also a trustee of Madcap Theatre. So very keen, very enthusiastic. We get a phone call from someone at the Development Corporation saying, can we put on some entertainment for their Christmas party, which was a 1940s themed party. And they were going to make Saxon Court into the Saxon Court Underground Station and had signs made for it. So we rehearsed from October. We put together a whole series of a cappella songs, and the boys also had been learning juggling and things at Madcap. So we decided they were going to have a whole routine where they're juggling grenades, and then they drop one, and boom, we were going to let off this fabulous confetti cannon. So we came to the night. We dashed down in uniform, and just about going on stage when the dinner gong went, and everyone disappeared to go and get their food. So suddenly we had nobody in front of the stage to perform to, but we gallantly went on and we sang our songs and the boys were juggling. And then at the moment that they're going to drop the grenade, I had that very crucial act of having to put the contacts onto the battery to make contact so it would go boom, confetti everywhere. So it came to the moment the boys juggling, drop the grenade, I put the contacts on the battery, absolute silence. Nothing happened at all. And the boys carried on juggling. We finished our act and we took our bow to the very small audience that was there and a smattering of applause. And we took our money and we ran. Never left so fast in my life after a show. And from that point on, I always felt slightly anxious when I walked into Saxon Court, down those wonderful stairs into the atrium. And I always had that flashback memory and hoping that nobody would ever recognise me, which thankfully they didn't. But now you know the story.
March 92 was a real special month for us. We had the visit of Her Majesty the Queen, where she was entertained for lunch in the atrium at Saxon Court. The main purpose of her visit was to celebrate 25 years of Milton Keynes Development Corporation and its achievements over that time. She came to Saxon Court, where we were going to entertain her to lunch. But before that, she had to go through the pain, I suspect, of being presented to by several bods. And I remember being incredibly nervous, irrationally nervous, hair sticking up on the back of my neck nervous, waiting to be presented to her. I then had to, having done my hello mum bit, I then had to present to a display board the story of employment generation, retail generation in Milton Keynes. And it all passed off brilliantly. And then at the end of March, the corporation held a party which the staff organised for all of the gang. And it was a very, very emotional evening. And I think it spoke volumes for the passion that all of those people had for both Milton Keynes and its development corporation, and what a great place it had been to work. And of course, at the end of that evening, March 31st, we all just fell off a cliff.
It was leading up to Milton Keynes Council becoming a unitary authority. And so the accommodation that it had at the civic offices wasn't large enough. So an opportunity then came along to take on Saxon Court, where it housed its children and adult social services primarily, and the housing department, and basically any of the services that Buckinghamshire County Council had run, which Milton Keynes Council were now taking over. I, in 1996, stood for election for Bradwell Ward in Milton Keynes Council. I was about 27 and the youngest elected councillor at the time. Sue Holdridge, who's sadly no longer with us, but she was the ward councillor for Wolverton, and she was scared of heights. And because of the way the building's designed, and had to go up the stairs from the atrium, and for some reason we couldn't get in the lift, and she visibly sort of was frozen and was really sort of petrified about sort of going up there and walking around the atrium. So one of the other councillors took off his coat and put it over her head, and between me and him and a couple of other councillors, we were sort of guiding her up the stairs and getting her into the offices for our meeting, and then sort of be able to take the coat off her, bless her. But yeah, so it must be awful if you do have because that is the one downside, if you do have a fear of heights, that you could visibly see everything at each vantage point from quite a way up.
When I started working at Saxon Court in 2006, when I joined Milton Keynes Council, and I have vivid memories of there being a canteen downstairs in the atrium. So you went down those big grand stairs and into this kind of tropical planted atrium space, and over to the right there was a canteen. And what was great was lots of tables built out into the atrium. And for me at the time, I was an arts development officer. And it could be quite hard to get meetings with the senior figures, but they'd always be there having a cup of tea in the morning. So you could just kind of idle past their table and say hello, or claim there were no extra spaces anywhere else to sit and drink your tea and join their table. And I loved that. But there was a problem with the canteen down in the atrium, that you went in and you could toast your own toast. There were toasters, and everyone always was in a rush. They'd turn the toasters up so they could get them toasted quickly, start talking, forget about it, and then the fire alarms would go off in the whole place because the smoke would start emitting from it. So it was a weekly occurrence that the fire alarms would go off and would all get evacuated from the building because someone had tried to do some speedy toasting.
When I first came, the desk that I was given was in a corner facing into the internal courtyard, as far away from the external windows as could possibly happen. But because of the opaque glass surrounding the courtyard, I had nothing to look out of. So I used to have to go and walk around the circular bit around the inner courtyard to actually see the palms and the trees and get a feeling that I wasn't actually just stuck in a silo. It did get a lot better. I think as I progressed up the ranks, I got moved to an outside bit to an external window, which was much better.
As soon as the first lockdown was introduced, demand for our 3-day emergency food parcels absolutely soared, and at one point in April we were distributing up to 1,100 parcels every week. It was very clear that our small usual home in Stacey Bushes was not going to be big enough to be able to distribute all these parcels and to observe COVID guidelines. So this is where the council stepped in and gave us all this space here. What was an office space, we quickly had to turn into a warehouse space where we store all our food that makes up our emergency parcels. Altogether, during the period we've been at Saxon Court, we've distributed over 27,500 of these parcels. They've gone to adults and children across Milton Keynes who need food, and that's been to around 15,000 households.
We did some calculations the other day about how many volunteer hours we need a day just to keep the operation, because we've moved from before we used to give about 1,000 food parcels a month. Now we give 1,000 food parcels a week. So it needs a huge infrastructure to support it. So we worked out that we need about 220 volunteer hours a day. So that's a lot of volunteer hours going into the food bank, but we've never not had the volunteers.
I've just been for my jab at Saxon Court in central Milton Keynes. I found it well organised, well signed, happy, pleasant people showed me in, no trouble whatsoever. Had a chat with the 2 people that were going to vaccinate me because I did have COVID at Christmas. I was diagnosed positive on Boxing Day, and you have to have 4 clear weeks from being tested positive before you could have your jab. So it's just sort of borderline, but it was okay. They gave me the jab. I went for my 15-minute sit. We talked about the next session there, and fine. I'm here I am, fine. I must admit, got mixed feelings about it all, but I was assured that any after effects would be only like flu-like, and I wonder whether this is here as a yearly thing. I don't know, but I'm fine. Thank you.
I'm pleased that, it's been put into other uses for housing and cafes and community type facilities, which I think is really good.
You look around at the city centre, and our buildings were built of an era where you could build, demolish, rebuild. So I love the fact that they're planning on retaining that original scale and scope of Saxon Court, and keeping a little bit of the heritage of the city. I think it's lovely.
They have a lot of exciting ideas which are a product of this generation of architects that will enliven the site, will be well managed because they're committed to the management, that needs well managing, and will add a lot to the experience of central Milton Keynes.